There's a moment I keep coming back to. A few years ago, I was helping a neighbor tear out his entire backyard irrigation system. Busted valve, cracked lines, controller that kept misfiring. He'd spent close to $800 putting that system in, and here we were, digging it all up on a Saturday in August while his tomatoes wilted 5 feet away. And I remember thinking, there has to be a better way to do this. A few weeks later, I was at a farm auction in Holmes County, Ohio, deep Amish country, and I started paying attention to the gardens I was passing on the drive-in. Big gardens, productive gardens, families feeding themselves through an entire winter from what those plots produced. And not a sprinkler head in sight. No PVC lines running under the beds. No controller box mounted to the side of the barn. Just soil, plants, and the quiet evidence of a system that clearly worked. So I started asking questions. And what I found over the next couple of years completely reworked how I think about water in the garden. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly what I learned. How Amish families keep large productive gardens thriving through summer heat and dry stretches without any of the pressurized systems most of us consider standard equipment. And stay with me to the end, because I'm going to share one particular technique they use with something most people throw away every single week, and it will change how your soil holds moisture for the entire growing season. Let me start by clearing something up, because I think there's a misconception that trips people up right from the beginning. When people hear no sprinklers, no irrigation, they tend to imagine struggle. They picture someone exhausted, hauling water in the dark, barely keeping plants alive. That's not what Amish gardening looks like. What it actually looks like is abundance. Cellar shelves stacked with canned goods. Root vegetables stored in barrels. Enough produce coming out of the ground to feed a family of 8 and still have extra for the neighbors. The reason that's possible without pressurized irrigation comes down to a principle that runs through everything the Amish do. They don't create dependencies they can't manage themselves. A sprinkler system depends on municipal water pressure, an electric controller, intact underground lines, and the assumption that none of it will fail during the 2 weeks in July when you need it most. Amish gardeners design around that entire chain of dependencies, not because they enjoy difficulty, but because they've learned, over generations, that simpler systems are more reliable systems. And when you take that approach to water, something becomes very clear. The goal isn't to deliver more water. The goal is to lose less of it. That is where everything starts. The first thing I noticed when I really started studying these gardens was how deliberately they're positioned, not just for sunlight. Most of us know to chase the sun, but for water movement. Every piece of land, even a flat suburban yard, has a natural direction that water wants to travel after a rainstorm. It might be subtle, just a few inches of grade across 100 feet, but water finds it every time. Amish gardeners know exactly where that path runs on their property, and they plant in conversation with it, not against it. What this looks like practically is garden beds oriented to intercept and hold water as it moves across the land. Rows run across the slope rather than up and down it. Low, gentle berms, maybe 3 inches high, run along the downhill edge of each bed. These aren't engineered structures. They're just the way the soil gets shaped when you're paying attention to how rain behaves. The result is that every rainfall, even a light one, delivers water directly into the root zone and holds it there while it soaks in. Meanwhile, in a conventional garden with rows running up and down a slope, that same rain sheets off the surface and puddles at the fence line while the soil stays surprisingly dry. I reshaped my own garden beds along these lines about 3 years ago. Used nothing but a 4-foot level, a rake, and an afternoon. The first time a real rain came through, I stood out there watching water pool and absorb into every bed instead of running off the edges. It sounds like a small thing. The water bills I got that July told me it wasn't small at all. Now, once you've set your garden up to catch rainfall more effectively, the next step is storing it. And this is where Amish households do something almost every homeowner could do, but most don't. They collect rainwater at scale. Not one barrel tucked behind a garage as a novelty. Multiple barrels positioned at every downspout, connected so that when one fills, the overflow feeds directly into the next. On a house with average roof coverage, a single inch of rainfall can generate 500 gallons or more of collectible water. That's not a number I made up. It's basic math based on roof square footage and rainfall volume. And it means that a good spring storm can fill enough storage to carry a large vegetable garden through a week or more of dry weather. The barrels themselves don't need to be expensive. Food-grade 55-gallon drums sourced from a local restaurant supply or food distributor, a simple spigot installed near the bottom, a piece of fine mesh screen secured over the top to keep out debris and mosquitoes. Total cost per barrel, if you source them yourself, could be under $35. The Amish don't buy purpose-built rain barrels with decorative finishes and built-in overflow ports. They solve the problem with what's available and what works. One practical note here. Before you set this up, spend 2 minutes searching your state's regulations on residential rainwater collection. Most states in the eastern half of the country have no restrictions at all. A handful of western states have rules around how much you can store. Know where you stand before you start drilling holes in barrels. Here's where I want to slow down, because this next piece is the one that made the biggest difference in my own garden, and it's the piece most people skip over entirely. Collecting water is only half of the equation. How? And when you deliver that water to your plants matters just as much, maybe more. And the Amish approach to this is almost the opposite of what most of us learned. Most gardeners water from above. We're used to sprinklers and spraying nozzles and wands held up over the tops of plants. It covers a lot of ground quickly and it feels productive. But from a plant's perspective, overhead watering is mostly waste and a little bit of harm. Here's why. When water hits leaves and stems, a significant portion of it evaporates before it ever reaches the ground. On a warm afternoon, that number can be staggering. Studies on sprinkler efficiency in home gardens have consistently found that 30 to 50% of the water never makes it to the root zone. It goes into the air instead. On top of that, foliage that gets wet and stays wet is an open invitation for fungal problems. Blight, mildew, leaf spot, these are not random misfortunes. They are predictable outcomes of a watering habit. Wet leaves plus warm temperatures plus time equals disease. The Amish have almost none of these problems in their gardens, and it's not luck. They water low and slow. Whether it's a watering can carried from a barrel or a gravity-fed line running along the base of a row, the water goes to the soil, not the plant. It's delivered gently enough to soak in rather than run off. It goes exactly where the roots are, which is down in the ground, not up in the canopy. I want you to try something tomorrow morning. Water one row in your garden the way you normally do. Then water the next row slowly, right at the soil line, letting each small pore soak in completely before adding more. Come back 2 hours later and push your finger 2 inches into the soil in both rows. In the first row, the surface might look wet, but it'll be dry an inch down. In the second row, the moisture will be there, right where the roots are reaching for it. That test changed everything for me. The best time to do this kind of watering is early morning, within the first couple hours of sunrise. The Amish are up before most of the country, and the garden gets attention before the heat of the day arrives. Evaporation is lowest in the morning. Any foliage that accidentally gets splashed has hours to dry before nightfall, which keeps disease pressure low. Now I want to talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in conversations about watering, and that's the soil itself. You can have perfect rain collection. You can water at the soil line every morning at exactly the right time. But if your soil is compacted, depleted, or low in organic matter, it cannot hold water. It will let everything drain through quickly, and your plants will be thirsty again in 24 hours regardless of how much effort you put into watering them. Amish gardens have a significant advantage here, and it's one that took me a while to fully appreciate. These are plots of land that have been tended continuously for generations. The same families working the same ground, putting organic matter back in every single year. The soil in a 100-year-old Amish kitchen garden is not the same substance as the hard clay or depleted topsoil in a typical suburban yard. It's dark, it's loose, it smells rich, and when it rains, it absorbs water like a sponge and holds it for days. You can't replicate a century of soil building overnight, but you can start moving in that direction right now. Work 2 to 3 inches of finished compost into the top 8 inches of your beds every spring. If you're starting a compost pile, keep feeding it. Kitchen scraps, garden trimmings, fall leaves, spent plants. All of it becomes the amendment that makes your soil hold water the way Amish gardens do. And on top of that amended soil, mulch. This is non-negotiable in the Amish approach. 3 to 4 inches of straw, shredded leaves, or untreated grass clippings laid over the surface of every bed. Mulch does 3 things at once. It shades the soil from direct sun, which cuts evaporation dramatically. It insulates the ground so roots stay cooler and the moisture that's in the soil doesn't get baked out. And as it slowly breaks down, it adds more organic matter to the very top layer of soil, building that sponge capacity year over year. A properly mulched bed with compost-amended soil can hold moisture 3 to 4 times longer than a bare, unimproved bed. I've tested this in my own yard with a soil moisture meter over 2 full seasons. The numbers are real. What would require watering every 2 or 3 days in a conventional bed might only need attention once a week in a well-mulched, compost-enriched one. That is not a small difference over the course of summer. Let me walk through a few habits that I see in most conventional gardens, including my own garden for most of my life, and contrast them with what Amish practice actually looks like. Not to criticize, but because seeing the side-by-side made things click for me in a way that descriptions alone didn't. Most of us water on a schedule. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, the timer kicks on and the sprinklers run whether it rained 2 days ago or not. Amish gardeners water based on what the soil says, not what the calendar says. Push your finger 2 inches into the ground. Dry at that depth. Water. Still moist? Leave it alone. Watering when the soil doesn't need it doesn't help the plants. It keeps the surface wet, encourages shallow roots, and wastes water that could have sat in a barrel for a dry week ahead. Most of us water too shallowly and too often. A quick 15 minutes with a sprinkler wets the top inch, and then the sun takes it back by noon. Amish gardeners water less frequently, but more deeply, pushing water down to where the root zone actually extends. Plants watered this way develop deeper, more extensive root systems that can access moisture further down in the soil profile. That makes them dramatically more drought resilient. Roots that live near the surface wilt the moment things get hot. Roots that reach down 6, 8, 10 inches have reserves to draw on. And most of us rely on a single water source, the municipal supply. When restrictions go into effect during a drought, that garden is in trouble. An Amish garden with stored rainwater, moisture-retentive soil, and mulched beds keeps going because it was never built around a supply that could be restricted or cut off. Now, here's the technique I promised you at the beginning. It involves something most people discard every single week, and once I started doing it, it became one of my favorite things about late autumn in the garden. Amish families practice what I can only describe as in-ground composting, and they've been doing it long before anyone gave a name. In the fall, after summer crops have been cleared, they dig shallow trenches directly in the garden beds, roughly 8 to 10 inches deep, right between where next year's rows will run. Into those trenches, they place layered kitchen scraps over the course of the winter. Vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, crushed eggshells, spent herbs, the cores and ends of everything that comes out of the kitchen. They cover each addition lightly with soil and let the whole thing sit through the cold months. By the time spring planting arrives, that material has broken down almost entirely in place. It hasn't been moved, transported, turned, or transferred from a pile. It has decomposed exactly where it's needed, and the soil directly above and around it is transformed. Darker, looser, biologically active, and, critically, significantly better at holding water than the surrounding ground. The reason this works so well for moisture retention is that decomposing organic matter is essentially a substrate for microbial life and earthworms. Both of those create pore spaces and channels in the soil structure. Microscopic architecture that holds water the way a sponge holds water, releasing it slowly to roots over days rather than draining it away in hours. When you bury kitchen scraps in the fall, you're essentially building that sponge right beneath where your plants will grow. I've been doing this for 4 winters now. I mark the trench rows each fall, so I know where I buried material, and I always plant directly alongside those spots the following year. By late July, when everything else in my garden is drying out faster than I can keep up, Those rows are consistently the last to show moisture stress. I can feel the difference with my bare hands. The soil a foot away from a buried scrap row feels noticeably firmer and drier. The soil right above it stays soft and slightly cool even on a 90-degree afternoon. Dig your trenches in October or November after your beds are cleared. Feed them through the winter as scraps accumulate. Cover everything up by late March and plant your rows right alongside it. Your August self will thank your November self. I want to close with something that I think is more important than any single technique I've described today. The thing that genuinely changed my gardening wasn't learning about berms or rain barrels or buried kitchen scraps. It was understanding the philosophy behind all of it. The Amish don't manage their gardens the way they do because modern alternatives don't exist. They know what a sprinkler system is. The reason they don't depend on one comes down to a deeply held conviction that you should understand every piece of the system you rely on and be able to maintain it without outside help. Applied to a garden, that conviction produces something remarkable, a system that runs on rainfall, gravity, soil biology, and careful observation. No electricity, no pressurized lines, no controller that can malfunction in a heat wave. Just a thoughtful arrangement of simple elements that work together with the way water naturally behaves. I've been growing food for over 30 years. I've tried most of the products, most of the systems, most of the gadgets. And the changes that have made the most consistent difference, the ones that still hold up year after year through drought, through heat, through whatever summer throws of the garden, are the ones I learned by watching communities who never had the option of depending on a system they couldn't control. This season, pick one of these approaches and try it. Reshape a bed to work with your slope. Set up a single barrel at your busiest downspout. Switch to soil line watering for one row and track the difference. Dig one trench this fall and bury your kitchen scraps in it. You don't have to change everything at once. But once you start moving in this direction, you'll find yourself needing that sprinkler less and less. And that quiet, self-sufficient garden, the one that keeps growing even when the weather turns stubborn, is a satisfaction that's genuinely hard to describe until you're standing in the middle of it. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.